Good morning. Today is Monday, July 29th, 2024. Vaydaber Hashem Moshe Lemor. Hashem says to Moshe in this week's Torah portion, it's the double Parsha of Matos Masai, the end of the book of Bamidbar, the fourth book of the Torah. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, Ki atem ovrim es hayarden arza Canaan, when you cross over the Jordan River into the land of Canaan, into the land of Israel. So just remember, the Jewish people are now on the eastern bank of the Jordan River, and Moshe is not going any further. We learned this already. Moshe is not going into Israel, but the Jewish people are going to cross over into the land of Israel, led by Yehoshua, Joshua. So now there are a number of instructions that Hashem is giving Moshe to give to the Jewish people about what will happen when they cross over into Israel, even though Moshe himself will not be there, but these are the instructions. So this one is a mitzvah that we have seen before and we've encountered before, but now it becomes more practical with some of the details. Vikrisim lachem arim, are mikla tiyena lachem, establish for yourselves cities of refuge. V'nashama rotzeach maka nefesh bishkaga. And that will be a place where a person who committed a murder, but it was accidental, it was negligent, that person will go to this one of these 6 cities and be safe there and, as I will try to describe, be rehabilitated there. Remember, in Jewish law, there are 3 different categories of negative actions. There can be an action, a crime, which is mazid, a willful sin. A person knows that it's wrong, and they know it's a crime, and they do it anyway. That's mazid. On the other extreme is ones. It was done against a person's will. A person had no volition in it. It was completely something they could not control. And in the middle is shogeg. Shogeg means I did not have any negative intention, but I was negligent. I could have been more careful. Had I been more careful, it wouldn't have happened, but I didn't want to hurt the person. So we would call that maybe negligent homicide or maybe even manslaughter. So it's negligent. It's negligence. And the Torah says that for such a person, there is a process of rehabilitation. That person is sent to one of these cities. They have to live there. The way the details of the cities are described in the Talmud, they are cities where there are positive role models. And there a person can reflect on showing more respect and honor for life and being more careful about actions that even though it was not done in anger, but still cause harm. So there is a rehabilitative process that goes on in these cities. So the Torah says that when you cross over into the land of Israel, then you will establish these cities. How many? V'ha'arim asher titenu, and the number of cities that you will establish. Sheish ari miklat tiyena lachem, 6. Now, in fact, in addition to these 6, which were just cities of refuge, there were also 42 cities of the Levium, the Levites, that served the same purpose as the cities of refuge. So actually there were 48 places that a person could go to. But let's just work with the 6 that are exclusively for this purpose. There are 6. Eis shalosh ha'arim titnu me'ever li'arden. 3 of these cities will be on the eastern bank of the Jordan. V'sheish ha'arim titnu be'eretz Canaan arei mikla tiyena, and there will be 3 of these cities on the west bank of the Jordan River, meaning in Israel proper. Remember that there must be cities on the eastern bank of the Jordan River because two of the tribes, Reuven and Gad, asked Moshe and eventually received permission to remain on the eastern bank of the Jordan River. So these cities are going to be available to them as well as to the people in Israel. You should be able to see immediately that the math seems to be off, because if there are two tribes on the eastern bank of the Jordan River, that means there are 10 tribes going in to Israel proper. But if there's a total of 6 cities, 3 are west of the Jordan and a full 3 are east of the Jordan, it seems like there are many more cities per person on the east bank than there are on the west bank. Okay, that's an interesting question, and I hope to discuss this further with you on Thursday night, but that's what the Torah says. Okay. One more time. 3 cities on the eastern bank of the Jordan River where the Jewish people already are, right there. And 3 will be established on the western bank inside of Israel once they enter in. Our sages explain that this entire system of cities receiving people who had committed this kind of an accidental murder only comes into effect 14 years later. When the Jewish people eventually cross the Jordan into the land of Israel, led by Yehoshua, it takes them 7 years to conquer the land and 7 years to divide the land. So many of the mitzvos that apply only in the land of Israel, not all of them, but many of them, only come into effect 14 years later. In other words, even the 3 cities on the eastern bank of the Jordan River, where the Jewish people already are right then at the moment that this is being discussed, they also do not come into effect until all of the cities come into effect 14 years hence. And that raises a problem with a verse later in the Torah. Because in the Parsha of Eschanan, we're going to read this in just a few weeks, the Torah says as follows. Again, we're still on the eastern bank of the Jordan River. The book of Devarim, Deuteronomy, is a series of speeches that Moshe gives to the Jewish people in the days before he passes away. And the Torah says in Eschanan, "Uz then," meaning while Moshe is still alive, while the Jewish people, Moshe, are still on the eastern bank of the Jordan River. So remember, I told you it's going to take 14 years before the cities of refuge come into practice. That clock did not start ticking yet because they're still on the eastern bank of the Jordan River. It's 14 years after they cross over. But Uz, then, while Moshe is still alive, while the Jewish people are still in the eastern bank of the Jordan River, Az Yavdil Moshe Shalosh Arim Be'evar Yarden. At that time, Moshe designated the 3 cities that were on the eastern bank of the Jordan River to act as cities of refuge. Remember, 3 on the eastern bank, 3 on the western bank. Moshe could not designate the 3 cities on the western bank because Moshe never went in. That would have to be left for Yehoshua, his successor. But he does designate 3 cities that will be cities of refuge once the 14 years passes and the whole thing comes into effect. So let me ask you a question. What is the value, what is the benefit of Moshe designating these 3 cities on the eastern bank of the Jordan River if there will be no practical application of these cities for another 14 years? Why not just wait until Yehoshua has done the 7 years and the 7 years, and then Yehoshua will designate all 6 cities at one time, and that's when they'll come into effect. What's the point of Moshe now designating 3 cities if they're just going to be dormant for 14 years? I'm not the first person to ask this question. The rabbis in the Talmud asked this question. And the rabbis in the Talmud give a very important answer. The Talmud says that we see from this verse that a person should run to grab any opportunity to do a mitzvah as soon as possible. Meaning as follows. God decided Moshe was not going into Israel. So Moshe would not be the one to designate the 3 cities inside of Israel and put this into process 14 years later. Moshe would not be able to do that. It would be left to his successor. But he was on the eastern bank of the Jordan. So even if he can't do the full mitzvah of putting into effect all 6 of the cities, at least he could designate 3 of them. And even though it's true that the 3 cities he designates will not actually be in effect, but it's something that he can do. It's a part of a mitzvah. It's a piece of a mitzvah. What we see from Moshe is an attitude. The attitude is, sometimes there's an opportunity to do a mitzvah, and we look at it as a burden. Sometimes people feel observing Shabbos, especially in the summer, and it's long, and people get a little bored and a little antsy, and if it's raining outside, you can't go for a walk. People feel it's a little bit of a burden that I have to sit at home and not be able to do any of the things that I would otherwise do. Sometimes a person could feel that, it could be a little bit of a burden to have to keep kosher all the time. Sometimes you're traveling, you don't have anything to eat, and you see something that really looks good and you want to try it, but you have to keep kosher. But at that moment, it may seem like a burden. Sometimes a person reaches out their hand to ask you for help, and you're just a little bit irritated. You're just a little bit put out already. It just feels a little bit like a burden. It shouldn't, but sometimes it does. Moshe is teaching us that the value of every single mitzvah, when we have the opportunity to be able to do something that God himself wants us to do, it is so precious. It is so important. We should run to it. And even if the situation is, I can't do the whole mitzvah, I can only do a part of it. I can only do one piece of it that will be then left to somebody else to finish, but I can have a piece of it, a portion of it. I should run to do that as well. It's an amazing attitude that Moshe is teaching us, and it is very, very practical to us in every area of life. Mitzvos are not a burden. They are gifts. They are opportunities to be able to gain pleasure in God's eyes, grace in God's eyes, to do what God wants. Even if it's a piece, even if it's a portion, we should run for it. I want to share a second answer to this question. It's an idea that I have shared with you before, but this is in a different context. Law, Jewish law, we're talking about Jewish law, but the truth is it applies in any system of law. Law has 2 purposes. Any given law has 2 purposes. One is to either require or prohibit a certain action. And if it prohibits a certain action, there is a consequence in law. If you do this, then this is the consequence in law. Each system has its own details. But every law also has a secondary purpose. Every law creates a societal value. It doesn't just say do this and don't do this. It says this is what we as a society think is important. A great example of this, just to take it into local law, is taxes. Most places have taxes. How does the tax system work? What do the taxes go for? Well, you can learn so much about a country by the priorities it sets in its tax law. For example, here in Quebec, there is a very generous financial break for someone that has a child. That's a law having to do with maternity leave and payment and stuff like that and holding your job, but it's a value. It says we as a society in Quebec want to promote families having children. And we think that the rest of society should subsidize that through the various laws that go into it. That's a value. The same thing in certain countries with, let's say, the defense budget. How large is it? How small is it? It reflects our values of what is important. The comparison in pay to different public workers. The difference in pay between, let's say, police and teachers. It says something about our values. This law of the Ir Miklat, the Cities of Refuge, is what will happen to a person who does this action. But it's also a lesson for all of society. We have to be careful. It's not an excuse to say, I didn't mean it. It doesn't bring the person back to life. A person who was careless, negligent, and because of that caused, God forbid, someone else's death, they have to be held accountable, even though they didn't mean it, even though they weren't angry at the person. Shogeg is a category that has to be addressed. And we have a method, a process, a system of rehabilitation for it. But it is a lesson to every single member of society. Be careful. Don't take risks. Preserving life is the highest value. So not only do we say it's prohibited, of course, to intentionally take life, but there will also be consequences for accidentally taking life. Be careful. Don't drive too fast. Wear seatbelts. Build your buildings in a manner that is safe. Protect your workers. Protect consumers. All of these laws reflect this value. You can't take chances when it comes to health and life. And so that didn't have to wait 14 years for the cities to come into effect. Moshe was able to start allowing these laws to act as a lesson to society immediately. That's why Moshe designates the 3 cities immediately while they're still in the eastern bank of the Jordan River. Even though the cities are not actually going to accept people, but having people know that the cities are there and reminding them about this mitzvah creates a value within society. And since Moshe is able to help create that value within society, he does so and it applies right away, even though the practical, applicable law will only start 14 years later. 2 reasons why Moshe designates these 3 cities now, even while on the eastern bank of the Jordan River. My friends, I wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.